My name's Landon Reed, 32, and I designed safety systems for a private jet's job I picked because it was steady, not glamorous. My father, Victor Reed, ran Reed Industries, a Houston-based oil empire that bought senators and buried scandals. At his funeral, the marble hall smelled like money and hypocrisy. My half-sister Tessa wore a black dress that looked like it came with a press release. The lawyer stood near the casket, voice trembling. To my son, Landon Reed, nothing. He's made his choices. The laughter was polite, cruel. I forced a smile as cameras flashed. The city's richest mourners love a downfall. But when the crowd dispersed, the mortician quietly handed me a small velvet pouch sealed with wax. He said this was to be placed inside the coffin, the man murmured. Inside was a USB drive wrapped in parchment and a note. If you're reading this, you've already been betrayed. That line would drag me through boardrooms, betrayals, and bloodlines until I learned that my father's final gift wasn't revenge. It was the truth worth $120 million. The moment they read my name, I knew what was coming. To my son, Landon Reed, nothing. He's made his choices. The mahogany-paneled conference room went silent for half a breath, then erupted in a low murmur. Cameras clicked, the air reeked of perfume and smugness. Tessa leaned back in her chair, the kind of smirk only the guilty wear comfortably. Even the lawyer wouldn't meet my eyes. It wasn't the money was the message. My father's last words to the world were that I wasn't worth a cent. By nightfall, the clip had already gone viral. Mechanic's son gets nothing. Splashed across gossip pages. My phone buzzed nonstop with sympathy texts from people who once avoided me at family parties. I didn't answer. I just sat in my workshop surrounded by the smell of jet fuel and rust, watching the same 30-second video on repeat. When I couldn't take it anymore, I pulled the small velvet pouch from my jacket, the one the mortician had handed me after the funeral. Inside was a simple silver USB drive, heavy in a way that felt wrong. Someone had wrapped it in parchment sealed with red wax. The writing was my father's. Open after burial. I slid it into my battered Dell laptop, the fan coughing to life. A single folder appeared. Open after burial. I clicked. Nothing happened except a faint chime and an audio file popping up beneath it. The file name was a date, 06/14/23, 1 week before he died. I pressed play. If you're hearing this, you're not as ordinary as they made you believe. His voice froze me. Calm. Controlled. That familiar tone that used to make CEOs tremble and me shrink. There are people who want this erased. They've already tried. If you want the truth, don't trust the house, the company, or your sister. Start with the coffin. The recording ended abruptly. My reflection stared back at me on the black, screen-tired eyes, a face that suddenly felt like someone else's. Start with the coffin. I grabbed my jacket and drove back to the cemetery, headlights slicing through the midnight rain. The groundskeeper looked half asleep when I flashed my father's funeral pass and said I'd left something behind. He shrugged and pointed toward the mausoleum. Inside, the air was thick and cold. The coffin sat beneath a marble arch, flowers already wilting. I replayed the funeral video on my phone, frame by frame, until something strange caught my eye. In the drone footage posted by the Houston Herald, a shadow leaned over the coffin just before it was sealed, tucking something beneath the bouquet. Zooming in, I saw the sleeve of a black blazer and a silver bracelet worn by Tessa's assistant, Jordan. Why would he touch the coffin? My pulse quickened. I lifted a few petals, searching carefully until I felt something rough under the silk lining duct tape. Someone had taped another USB there, identical to mine, but gone now, just the sticky residue left behind. Someone had already been here. Someone knew exactly what my father left for me. I backed away, my breath fogging in the dim light. A realization struck hard. The USB I held wasn't unique, had been cloned. Whoever copied it got to my father's secret first. And as I stepped into the rain, phone buzzing again with headlines mocking my name, one thought swallowed every other. If the drive was copied, then somewhere out there, someone else knew my father's final message and they were already acting on it. The morning after the funeral, my workshop felt like the only place left that didn't judge me. The smell of machine oil and burnt steel clung to the air. The old oscillating fan buzzed like it was whispering secrets. I stared at the USB again, half expecting my father's voice to crawl out of it and finish that sentence. Nothing. Out of habit, I slid open the bottom drawer of my tool chest where I kept parts too broken to throw away. Something caught the light. A corner of faded blueprint paper stuck out from under the metal tray. I pulled it free. It was a schematic of a 1970s twin-engine jet, torn down the middle, edges dark with oil. In the bottom corner, in my father's handwriting, was a signature. V.R. When I lined up the torn halves, I noticed a string of numbers scrawled near the edge longitude and latitude coordinates. Below them, in slanted red ink, "Start where we crashed last." My stomach tightened. He wasn't talking about a literal crash, was he? Before I could overthink it, my phone buzzed with a name I hadn't seen in years. Grace Ellis. She used to work in Dad's private aviation archive before the company replaced her team with digitization bots. "Landon Reed," she said, voice cautious. "Your father's blueprints weren't like any others. He encoded metadata into the engineering lines. Old system. 1980s symbology, hardly anyone remembers how to read it. You should bring it in." 2 hours later, I met her in a dusty storage room behind the Houston Air Museum. She spread the blueprint under a magnifier and frowned. "These aren't repair notes. They're route markers. This coordinate set points to a storage hangar near Trinity Field. He must have kept something there off the books." Before I could answer, my phone chimed again, Tessa, live on social media. Her voice echoed from the screen. "Some people will do anything for attention, even drag our father's name through the mud with conspiracy theories." She'd uploaded a video from our last argument, my face red and strained, her tone icy calm. The caption read, "Jealous mechanic loses it over inheritance. Baitea Suelens." The comments shredded me within minutes. "Ungrateful brat," one said. "Playing victim to get clicks," another. Grace looked up. "You okay?" I nodded, even though I wasn't. She wants to make me look unstable. It's her favorite strategy. I folded the blueprint and shoved it into my jacket. If Dad wanted me to start where we crashed last, then I'm starting. Trinity Field was 2 hours out of Houston forgotten runway surrounded by weeds and half-collapsed hangars. The one from the coordinates looked newer, padlocked but humming faintly, as if power still ran inside. My hands shook as I entered the code etched into the padlock's rust. It clicked open like it had been waiting for me. The metal door groaned upward, releasing a breath of dust and cold air. The hangar smelled of jet fuel and mold. My flashlight swept across a stripped-down fuselage, toolboxes, and stacks of yellowed flight logs. The logs were labeled in my father's neat handwriting. June 12th, June 20th, July 3rd. The last one read, August 4th, Test Flight Victor Reed, unknown passenger. The page was sticky, smeared in something dark that had soaked deep into the paper fibers. When I touched it, the residue flaked under my glove. Blood, fresh enough to still stain. And the date was 1 month before he died. The blood on the flight log wasn't dry in my head yet when I noticed the binder underneath it, thick, leather-bound ledger embossed with the Reed Industries logo. The smell of old paper and jet fuel hit me the second I opened it. Each page recorded flight data fuel quantities, maintenance signatures, and destinations halfway through. Something didn't add up. Line after line listed small sums, then one bold entry jumped out. Transfer $12,000 G. E. Grace Ellis. My stomach dropped. I took a picture and sent it to her with a shaky hand. Within seconds, she called. "What do you mean by G.E.'d? Landon, I never received any money from your father. I didn't even know he had that much liquid." Her voice trembled, half confusion, half panic. "Then someone used your initials," I said. "Or he trusted you more than anyone else." Grace went quiet. "Bring it to me, now." I refused. Something about that ledger felt dangerous, like proof of something meant to stay buried. As I flipped through, I noticed small altitude numbers scribbled in the margins. 2400, 3100, 1800. They weren't random. My father had taught me once how to encrypt coordinates using altitude letter shift 1,000 feet equaled 1 letter's shift. My pulse quickened as I tested it on the first sequence. 2 to 4 zeroed 0, shift 2 letters forward, T. 3 1 0 0, shift 3, R. 1 8 in a row 0, shift 1, U, and so on. After 10 minutes of decoding, a hidden phrase emerged in messy block letters across the page. Trust the painting. I froze. The painting. My father's prized possession 7-foot oil portrait of a storm-tossed ship hung above the grand staircase at the Reed mansion. It was his favorite, the only thing he refused to loan to galleries. He used to say, "That painting knows more about this family than I do." I called Eleanor, my stepmother. "I need to see the portrait," I said. Her voice hardened immediately. "No, Landon. You're not setting foot in this house. Your father's gone. His things are ours now." Click. I stared at my phone, jaw tight. She was hiding something. That night, the mansion hosted a charity gala for Reed Industries. Perfect cover or perfect disaster? I wore my old black suit and slipped through the catering entrance with a fake staff badge I printed in my workshop. The house was glowing with champagne laughter and fake condolences. I moved fast, cutting across the marble hallway, keeping my head low. My heart pounded with every echo of my footsteps. The painting loomed above the staircase, lit like an idol. I climbed halfway up and reached for the frame. My fingers brushed cold gold leaf. Behind me, a camera flash exploded. "Hey, Landon Reed?" I turned. A paparazzi freelancer grinned, holding up his phone. "Breaking for inheritance clues. This is gold." In seconds, others turned. Phones rose. Murmurs spread. "Is that him? The disinherited one?" Humiliation burned hotter than the camera lights. My name trended online before I even made it out the door. But I didn't stop. I pried the frame loose with a screwdriver, ignoring the gasps. The back of the canvas peeled away just enough to reveal a thin pocket of paper, something hidden flat between the wood and fabric. I reached in and pulled out a faded Polaroid photo. A small boy, no older than 5, smiling beside a woman with dark hair and olive skin, of there. Then I realized the boy was me, and the woman holding my hand wasn't Eleanor Reed. I stared at the Polaroid until the colors seemed to bleed into the air around me. The woman's hand was on my shoulder, her smile soft, almost maternal. My father stood in the background of the mansion in that same Erasime hair, same gold cufflinks, but this woman wasn't Eleanor. And she wasn't a stranger either. There was something in her eyes that felt like déjà vu, a calm I didn't remember but somehow missed. I confronted Eleanor the next morning. She was in her dressing room, wrapped in silk and venom. The moment I showed her the Polaroid, her expression cracked into something sharp. "That woman ruined our family before you were even born," she hissed. "Who is she?" "Someone your father should have buried deeper." When I pressed her, she turned away, dabbing perfume on her wrist. Her name was Landon Hayes, Victor's first fiancée. She disappeared before the wedding car crash in New Mexico. He never forgave himself. "You shouldn't dig her up." Her tone carried finality, but her hands trembled slightly. I walked out, clutching the photo like it might burn through my skin. Grace met me at a diner outside town, papers spread across the table. "Landon Hayes," she repeated, eyes scanning public archives. "If this photo paper is real, it's at least 30 years old." She flipped the photo over under a blacklight. "See that watermark? Desert Tone Photo Co. They stopped producing in 1996. "So the picture wasn't recent," I said. "Not even close. Which means whoever took it either preserved it or found it in an archive meant to stay sealed." That night, we drove west toward New Mexico. It felt like crossing into another life. Rusted gas stations, sunsets that looked painted in gasoline, and empty towns that whispered secrets. In Marisol's hometown, an old clerk at a hardware store remembered her name instantly. Landon Hayes. She used to come in here with Victor Reed, right? Fancy cars, fancy promises. She filed some kind of lawsuit after he took her patent. Never saw her again after that. "What patent?" I asked. He shrugged. "Something to do with refinery safety valves. She said it would change the oil industry." Next thing, the Reeds owned the patent. Then she vanished. Grace's jaw tightened. If she sued and disappeared, someone made sure it never reached court. As we drove back toward Houston, my phone buzzed with an email notification and desist from Reed Industries Legal. The subject line read, "Defamation of Corporate Reputation." Attached was a statement signed by Tessa Reed. Effective immediately, Landon Reed is ordered to cease public commentary or insinuations regarding Victor Reed's private affairs. Further violations will result in litigation. Grace glanced over my shoulder at the screen. "They're scared," she said quietly. "That's not a threat, it's a warning shot." I laughed bitterly. They should be scared. When we got back to my apartment, the front desk clerk stopped me. "Mr. Reed, someone dropped this off for you." He handed me a thick manila envelope sealed with a court stamp dated 1991. My full name was typed neatly across the front. Landon Reed. No sender. No note. Grace frowned. "That's the year your father married Eleanor." The paper was dry and brittle under my fingers, like it had waited decades to breathe. I held it to the light inside, faint silhouettes of stapled pages. And for the first time, I hesitated to open it. Whatever waited inside that envelope felt heavier than any inheritance could ever be. The paper felt almost sacred when I broke the seal. The courtroom emblem cracked under my thumb, and a gust of stale air escaped like the past exhaling. Inside were 8 pages of legal filings typed on yellowed stock. The first line stole the breath from my lungs. Custody petition. Victor Reed versus State of New Mexico. Minor child, Landon Hayes. Hayes, not Reed. I read it twice, then a third time, hoping it would rearrange itself into something less impossible. The document detailed how Victor Reed, under an alias, Richard Vale had filed for guardianship over an abandoned infant following the death of one Marisol Hayes. Except there was no death certificate attached, no ruling of adoption, only a judge's note scrawled at the bottom. Temporary guardianship granted pending verification. Ichishund. Grace sat across from me, eyes scanning every word. Landon. This means your birth name isn't Reed, it's Hayes, and your father never legalized the adoption. On paper, you don't exist in the Reed family. I leaned back, dizzy. So I'm not legally his son? She hesitated. You are by blood, probably. But by law? Maybe not. The room tilted. My entire life, every achievement, every rejection had all belonged to a name that wasn't mine. Grace reached across the table. There's one way to be sure. DNA. The company still runs paternity verification in-house for legacy estates. I can get us, but we'll need someone inside. That someone turned out to be Jonas, my half-brother, the only Reed with a conscience. When I told him, he stared at the documents for a long time before whispering, "I always wondered why Dad treated you like you were both son and secret." That night, he used his clearance badge to slip us into Reed Industries' biolab. The place hummed with quiet machines and blue LED lights that made every truth look colder. Grace drew a sample, sealed it, and fed it into the analyzer. As the machine whirred, Jonas stood watch near the door. 15 tense minutes later, the monitor blinked green. A report appeared, encrypted with Victor's corporate ID. Grace decrypted it using her old archivist credentials. Result, 99. 99% paternal match subject, Victor Reed, alias Richard Vale. I exhaled shakily. So he was my father. Grace nodded. But under a different name. Richard Vallehy used that alias when he filed patents offshore in the 1980s. She scrolled through connected records, eyes widening. These patents, all listed under Vale and Hayes Technologies. They were never dissolved. She clicked one document open. A license for refinery safety, the same design Marisol had been developing before she vanished. "Landon," she whispered, "the Hayes patents are still active and generating royalties. Over $120 million. Frozen in litigation because no verified heir ever claimed them." I staggered back. That's why he hid it. If anyone found out he took them from her, he'd lose everything. Jonas rubbed his temple. Or maybe he was trying to give it back to you. Before I could respond, the lab lights flickered. A loud beep echoed through the room. Grace's screen flashed red. Unauthorized access detected. Data purge in progress. Jonas cursed. Someone's wiping the servers. Grace yanked out the flash drive she'd been saving data to, but the progress bar froze. In the hallway, security alarms began to shriek, red strobes bathing us in panic. We bolted for the exit, the file clutched to my chest, but when I glanced back, every screen in that lab went dark years of evidence, erased in seconds. The truth about my name had survived only in our hands, and whoever triggered that purge already knew it existed. The next morning, I sat in my workshop staring at the blackened USB that had once felt like a lifeline. Now, it was just another dead piece of meat like everything else my father had left behind. The lab purge had erased all proof of my identity. No records, no DNA verification, no trace of the $120 million patents tied to the name Hayes. It was as if the world had decided I'd never existed. I spent the next 2 days tearing through trash bins behind Reed Industries headquarters, hoping for anything to prove who ordered that purge. The guards ignored me. I was the disgraced son now, the ghost haunting the family's empire. Then, near the loading dock, I saw it. A clear plastic bag filled with shredded paper corporate receipts, AAND requisition slips. I took it home and spent the night on my workshop floor, piecing strips together like a deranged puzzle. When I finally aligned one with a partial company letterhead, my heart stopped. Reed Industries Data Center, purge request, authorized by C. Donovan Cole Donovan, Victor's oldest friend, his business partner, the man who'd helped build Reed Industries from a single refinery lot. I remembered him from childhood, smelling of cigars and arrogance, always calling me the mechanic's kid. If anyone knew where Victor's secrets were buried, it was him. I found his name still registered to an old refinery site outside Galveston, long abandoned, half-flooded, and legally condemned. It took an hour to find the office building still standing, its windows like broken teeth. When I stepped inside, a voice echoed from the shadows. "You're late, kid. I thought you'd never find the crumbs." Cole stepped into the light, older, leaner, eyes like steel filings. "Why'd you erase it?" I demanded. "The DNA files, the patent logs, everything." He smiled, slow and deliberate. "Your father asked me to. Years ago. He said if anyone tried to dig up the past, it'd only destroy what's left of the family. But I guess he didn't count on you being this persistent. Where's the backup?" He tapped his temple. "He told me he hid it somewhere only you would ever open. Said you'd understand when the time came." My mind raced. Something I'd open. Cole chuckled. "Think mechanical. Think sentimental." The man never could resist metaphors. I turned to leave, but his voice followed me. "Careful, Landon. Some doors stay locked for a reason." Back at my hangar, the words echoed in my head. Something only I'd ever repair. I scanned the room. Old engines, broken turbines, half-built projects. Then my gaze landed on the centerpiece unfinished jet engine I'd been rebuilding for 3 years. It was the first engine my father ever let me take apart as a kid. I grabbed my wrench and started unbolting the compressor casing. The deeper I dug, the more certain I became. And then, hidden in the hollow beneath the turbine shaft, I saw it, a sealed titanium capsule engraved with my father's initials. My hand shook as I pried it free. Before I could open it, headlights flared through the workshop window. Tessa stepped out of a black SUV, flanked by 2 private security guards in dark suits. "You're trespassing on Reed property," she said coolly. "Hand it over, Landon." Her voice was calm, but the guns behind her weren't. I held the capsule tight. "You think you can scare me now? After stealing my life?" She smiled faintly. "Not scare you. Just stop you before you embarrass what's left of this family." The guards moved closer. I twisted the capsule's latch and cracked it open before they could reach me. Inside lay a blank document, no encryption, a single handwritten note folded beneath it. "Try looking under your mother's name." My throat went dry. Marisol Hayes wasn't dead. And if she were alive, she was the only one who could tell me who I really was. The name Marisol Hayes had become a ghost that followed me everywhere. After finding the note in the capsule, "Edie, try looking under your mother's name," Grace immediately went to work. She was the kind of person who could trace a shadow back to the person who cast it. 3 hours later, she burst into my hangar holding a printed auction catalog. "Found her," she said breathlessly. "Marisol Hayes's estate items. Sold off last month in Santa Fe. There's one piece that matches the initials on the T-silver locket with M.H. engraved on the clasp." The listing photo showed a teardrop-shaped locket, dull from age but elegant in its simplicity. The description: personal effects of the late Marisol Hayes, unidentified heir. We drove all night to New Mexico, the desert swallowing the road. The dealer remembered the buyer, an elderly collector named Wilcox who ran an antique store near Route 40. Wilcox was slow-moving, suspicious at first, but when Grace explained who I was, his expression softened. "That locket came with a warning," he said. "The woman who dropped it off said, 'If anyone comes looking for this, make sure they're ready for the truth.'" He handed it to me, cool and heavy in my palm. On the back, a faint inscription shimmered under the light. R.V. M.H. My father's alias. Grace borrowed a magnifier from the counter and gasped. "Landon, there's a micro-etched code right here on the inner clasp hinge." The serial read P.O. Box 418, Santa Fe. We followed the lead to a dusty post office that looked frozen in time. The clerk hesitated when I handed over my ID and the locket. Then she disappeared into the back and returned with a small, weathered envelope. It was postmarked the day before my father died. The sender, Victor Reed. I tore it open. Inside was a handwritten postcard, scrawled in my father's hurried script. "The empire is built on lies. Find the Blue Room, V." Grace frowned. "Blue Room? What does that even mean?" I thought back. Reed Industries had dozens of conference halls, boardrooms, and lounges. But there was the Blue Room. I remembered seeing an old framed photo in my father's office of him standing in front of a cobalt-painted wall, flanked by executives. It was where the company signed its first billion-dollar deal. But Grace's research killed that memory fast. The Blue Room was demolished during the 2010 remodel. The space doesn't exist anymore. My hope sagged, but Jonas called later that night with a nervous whisper. "You're not wrong. The new headquarters sits right over the old foundation. There's a sealed annex under the basement called the Blue Annex. The paint's still there. He used it for private meetings. No cameras, no records." Grace's eyes lit up. "That's where the truth is. The empire he built on lies. We decided to break in after midnight." The building loomed above us like a monument to greed glass, steel, and silence. Jonas used his access card to disable the sublevel alarms. We descended a narrow service stairwell until the concrete gave way to the faint shimmer of blue paint still clinging to the walls. The air was thick, metallic. My flashlight flickered across stacks of file boxes, scattered blueprints, and a steel trapdoor in the corner marked Private Storage. I took one cautious step forward. The floor groaned, then crack. Before I could react, the ground split beneath me, and I fell through the collapsing floor into darkness. The last thing I heard was Grace screaming my name. The fall knocked the air out of my lungs. I hit metal hard, rolled, and lay staring into pitch blackness as dust rained down. My flashlight landed a few feet away, flickering weakly against a wall of concrete and rust. When I finally caught my breath, I realized I wasn't in a basement, was in a vault. The walls curved inward, lined with hundreds of safety deposit boxes, their brass tags dulled with age. A faint hum filled the silence, like air struggling through old vents. My flashlight beam swept across rows of engraved initials. A, R, C, D, V, R, then one caught my eye, L, H. My fingers trembled as I brushed the dust off the latch. Landon Hayes, my true name, the name I wasn't supposed to have. The lock was old, mechanical. I found a piece of rebar on the floor and forced it until the latch snapped. The box creaked open, releasing a stale gust of air that smelled of ink and time. Inside lay a small black ledger, edges frayed, pages filled with my father's unmistakable handwriting. The first entry chilled me. Eleanor and Cole discovered the truth. They have Jonas. They say if I don't sign the revised will, they'll expose everything. I flipped through more pages, columns of numbers, offshore transfers, secret payments to government inspectors. Fuel purity falsified. Refinery explosion payout buried. Then a folded letter, sealed with my father's initials. I opened it carefully. Landon, if you're reading this, you've survived more than I ever deserved to leave you. I let them turn my empire into a weapon. Eleanor and Cole blackmailed me with Jonas's birth records, not mine by blood, but I raised him as my own. To protect him, I signed everything away, even you. The false will, the public humiliation, was all meant to buy time until I could make things right. I swallowed hard, eyes burning. The Reed name isn't built on wealth. It's built on fear. You're the only one who can rebuild it under your real name. Don't chase the money. Chase the truth. That's where the inheritance lies. At the bottom of the page, he'd drawn a crude map symbol matching the engraving on the metal floor plate I'd fallen through. I shone my flashlight on the plate and saw the numbers etched along its edge. 04, 12, 23. Access sequence 47A. A vault within a vault. My father hadn't hidden money, he'd hidden evidence. I was still piecing it together when I heard muffled footsteps above, faint but deliberate. I tucked the ledger into my jacket and found the rusted ladder leading up toward the broken floor. Each rung creaked under my weight as I climbed. When I reached the top, a burst of light blinded me. Flashlights, dozens of them. Hands where we can see them. Corporate security. Reed Industries private guards. I froze, raising my hand slowly, the letter crinkling in my pocket. Trespassing. Evidence theft. You're under arrest, one barked. Where's Grace? I demanded. She was with me. No answer, just blank faces and raised weapons. My heart thudded. Then a sound car door slamming outside, tires screeching. One guard spoke into his earpiece. Target secured. Package en route to Donovan. Cole. Grace wasn't gone, she'd been taken. The guards yanked me to my feet and cuffed my wrists, but I barely felt the metal bite. The ledger pressed against my ribs like a heartbeat. My father's last words echoing through my skull. He'd asked me to rebuild the family name. But first, I had to save the only person left who believed it was worth saving. They shoved me into the back of the patrol van, but the second the doors slammed, I realized something wasn't real cops. No badges, no codes over the radio, just corporate muscle in borrowed uniforms. They drove me a few miles down the road, then threw me out near my hangar and sped off. It wasn't an arrest. It was a warning. I staggered inside, adrenaline still buzzing. My phone was vibrating non-stop, 6 missed calls from Grace. The last one came in less than 10 minutes ago. When I tried to call back, it went straight to voicemail. The next ping nearly broke me. A text from an unknown number. If you want her alive, bring the real ledger. No police, no heroics. C.D. Cole Donovan. I sat at my workbench replaying everything. I didn't even have the real ledger, just my father's confession and the copy I'd scanned. My hands shook as I opened Grace's voicemail. Static, then wind strong, whistling through broken glass. A faint clang of a church bell followed by her muffled voice, Landon dawned. And then silence. I replayed it again and again until I caught a clue that bell had a distinct echo. Grace once told me she grew up near the refinery's old chapel, a decommissioned parish used to house migrant workers decades ago. That's where he'd taken her. I loaded the ledger into my jacket, grabbed a crowbar, and headed out. The night air smelled of rain and rust as I parked behind the crumbling parish. The bell tower loomed above, half collapsed, the wind groaning through its holes. Inside, candlelight flickered across the cracked walls. I followed the sound of paper burning. Grace was tied to a chair in the center of the nave, surrounded by piles of smoldering documents, co-company ledgers, flight logs, patent papers. Cole stood over her, a pistol in one hand and a half-burned file in the other. "Your father should have stayed dead," he said when he saw me. He thought he could outsmart us, but we've always been one step ahead. He was going to redirect every dollar, $120 million, to that little invention company under your real name, Hayes Trust. He thought you'd rebuild it. Keep his legacy clean. Grace winced as the flames crept closer. I moved toward them slowly. Let her go, Cole. She has nothing to do with this. He laughed. She's the reason you found anything. The archivist with a conscience. She dug too deep. She's leverage. I took another step. You erased the data, didn't you? You've been scrubbing Reed's records for years. His grin widened. Someone has to protect the Empire. You think you're the hero here, kid? You're just another loose end. The smell of gasoline hit me before I saw the canister by his boot. Flames licked up the carpet, catching the edge of the pews. I lunged, swinging the crowbar. He fired once, the bullet grazing my shoulder. Pain flared hot, but adrenaline carried me forward. The crowbar connected with his wrist. The gun clattered across the floor. Grace screamed as the fire roared higher, swallowing the rafters. I grabbed her chair and kicked the ropes loose. Run! Cole stumbled to his feet, coughing through smoke. You don't get it, Landon, he shouted. The trust's a trap. He didn't leave you a fortune. He left you a fuse. Before I could ask what he meant, the burning ceiling groaned and collapsed. I dove, pulling Grace down with me. Through the smoke, I saw Cole slip backward into the inferno, his silhouette framed in fire. His last words tore through the roar of flames. It's not the truth that you ought to bury yourself. Then the beams came down, and the blaze devoured him whole. I dragged Grace out through a broken window as the parish exploded behind us, raining embers over the refinery grounds. Somewhere in that fire, my father's last secret had just turned into something even bigger and infinitely more dangerous. When the fire was finally out, Grace and I sat in the shadow of the burnt chapel, coughing through soot and disbelief. Cole's last words wouldn't leave my heart. The trust will bury you. 2 days later, I went back to the vault, this time under the cover of night. The place reeked of damp metal and dust, but it was still intact. I retraced my father's handwriting across the ledger's final page, the one labeled Hayes Trust 1989. There was a note in the margin, filed with First Federal Rural Branch. In a rusted file drawer, I found a manila envelope with a brittle cover sheet bearing the Reed Industries seal. Inside were several pages typed on yellow paper, stamped Confidential, the Hayes Trust. The header listed 2 names, Victor Reed, VR, and Marisol Hayes, MH, each page initialed by both. It was a contract written on an old Underwood typewriter, the letters uneven, some punched too deeply. Grace leaned over the pages under her flashlight. Wait, see the pattern in the spacing? Those aren't typos, she whispered. We rubbed graphite over the page, and faint indentation marks appeared beneath the text numbers, faintly visible, 0310-4897. Routing, 221996563, a bank routing number. We followed it to a small branch 2 hours outside Houston's red brick buildings, surrounded by cornfields, the kind of place that hadn't updated its computers since the 90s. When we mentioned Victor Reed and Hayes Trust, the manager, a silver-haired man with a banker's practiced calm, suddenly froze. His pen slipped from his hand. Where did you hear that name? He asked quietly. From my father, I said, and from my mother's grave. He hesitated, then locked the front doors, turned the sign to closed, and motioned us toward the back. Follow me. He led us into a vault-like room lined with file cabinets and paper ledgers instead of servers. Pulling one drawer open, he retrieved a thick blue folder marked HT 1989. The trust was never closed, he said, setting it on the table. But the beneficiary changed 5 years ago. He flipped the top page and my blood turned to ice. Beneficiary. Tessa Reed Holdings, LLC. Grace's voice was barely a whisper. She transferred everything. The manager continued. The documents list a court executor named Miles Harper, the family's legal counsel. I clenched my fists. Miles retired 10 years ago. He couldn't have signed anything. Grace's jaw tightened. She forged it. She used his name. His Selthan buried the originals. The manager looked uneasy. Mr. Reed, I shouldn't even be showing you this. If the board finds out, I cut him off. If you're scared of Tessa, that's proof enough she's guilty. He didn't answer. He simply pushed the folder toward me. Take it before anyone notices. We left the bank in silence, the folder heavy in my hands. Every page was a betrayal. My father had built a trust to preserve what was left of our family's honor, and Tessa had stolen it, laundering $120 million into her company to fund her own empire. Back in the car, Grace turned on the radio, but the airwaves already carried the next strike. "Breaking news," a reporter announced. "Tessa Reed, CEO of Reed Industries, has issued a public statement regarding her estranged brother, Landon Reed, who she claims has been forging corporate documents to extort the family estate." Grace turned the volume up. Tessa's voice filled the cabin, cool and rehearsed. "My father's memory is being exploited by a fraud who never carried the Reed name with dignity. Any records he presents are forgeries." My knuckles whitened around the wheel. She'd beaten me to the story again, and this time she wasn't just stealing the trust, she was stealing the truth. The televised interview was meant to destroy me, but instead it exposed something Tessa never noticed she carried. While the reporters fixated on her words, my eyes locked on the glint of ink just above her bracelet, a tiny geometric tattoo. At first it looked decorative, but the shape gnawed at my memory. A perfect square divided by 4 lines, a circle in the corner. It was the exact layout of the vault I'd fallen into beneath the Blue Room. Grace replayed the broadcast frame by frame until it became undeniable. "Landon," she whispered, "your father mapped the vault on her wrist. He made her his own safety deposit box. Victor's final insurance policy. The tattoo had coordinates." 2 days later, the court hearing for my forgery case began. Reporters filled the aisles, cameras humming. My father's ledgers were now evidence against me. When the judge called me forward, I raised my wrist toward the projection screen. "Your Honor, may I request to display Exhibit C?" On the screen, the freeze frame of Tessa's tattoo appeared, enlarged. The murmurs swelled. "This isn't art," I said. "It's a map. My father used his daughter's skin as a code to the one place she could never sell the Reed vault. That's where the real will is." Tessa's lawyer objected, but the courtroom was already leaning in. The judge turned to her. "Is that tattoo real?" Tessa hesitated. "It's sentimental." Eleanor shifted in her seat, her facade cracking. I pressed on. "My father's confession mentions an insurance mark kept where greed can't erase it. He encoded the location under her skin. If we follow it, it leads to the basement vault sealed in 2010. The judge folded his hands. "Mrs. Reed, can you confirm whether such a safe exists?" Eleanor's composure was shattered. He made me promise never to open it. Said if I did, everything would fall apart." The courtroom erupted. "Under oath, Mrs. Reed," the judge said sharply. Tears welled in her eyes. "Yes, the safe exists. And Victor left something inside. He called it his last laugh." The room fell silent. The judge turned to the bailiff. "Then we'll open it now, in this court's presence." Reporters rushed to the doors, cameras rolling live. I watched Tessa's face lose all color as the judge's gavel echoed. Within the hour, we were escorted to the Reed headquarters basement. The air was thick with anticipation and old concrete dust. A technician cracked the safe's biometric lock while the live feed broadcast to every major network. Tessa stood rigid beside me, jaw tight. Grace squeezed my hand once, steadying me. The door hissed open, releasing a cold breath that smelled of metal and paper. Inside lay a single-object sealed cream envelope. Edges yellowed with time, addressed in my father's handwriting, "Landon Reed, do not open until they all laugh." The camera lights flashed like lightning. I stared at the words, pulse pounding in my ears. Whatever was inside that envelope wasn't just meant for me, it was meant to destroy every lie that had ever been told in the Reed family name. The courtroom had never been so quiet. The air vibrated with anticipation as every lens, every mic, every pair of eyes fixed on the single envelope in my hand. Father's last message to a family built on lies. The judge gave a small nod. "You may open it, Mr. Reed." My fingers trembled as I broke the wax seal. Inside were 2 items, a folded letter written in Victor's firm, unmistakable handwriting, and a crisp white bank transfer slip. The letter began simply, "If they're laughing, it means they still think they've won. That's when you open this, son." The courtroom rustled. I kept reading aloud, voice shaking but steady. I spent a lifetime buying silence, heirs, mine, the world's. I thought control could protect you. I was wrong. I moved everything, very patent, every royalty, every stolen cent, to something no one could steal. The Hayes Restoration Foundation. You, Landon Hayes Reed, are its founder and executor by law. $120 million not for revenge but for rebuilding what I broke. If you want to be richer than me, fix what I ruined. I swallowed hard and unfolded the second document, a certified transfer slip. The account was active, funds already cleared, name printed bold. The Hayes Restoration Foundation founder, Landon Reed. Gasps rippled through the room. Grace pressed a hand to her mouth. Tessa stood frozen, her confidence draining from her face as reporters surged forward. The judge turned toward her attorneys. Given this evidence, all assets previously transferred under Tessa Reed Holdings are hereby frozen pending fraud investigation. Tessa shook her head violently. No, he forged that too. But Eleanor slumped in her chair, whispering, he told me this would happen. He told me she'd laugh until it stopped being funny. The cameras caught every second of he once golden heiress now cornered by her own greed. I didn't feel triumphant. Just a heavy, aching relief. The truth wasn't glorious. It was quiet. When the hearing ended, I walked out of the courthouse with Grace, the envelope still warm in my hand. You did it, she said softly. I shook my head. He did it. I just finished the job. Weeks later, the Foundation's website went live. The Hayes Restoration Fund scholarships for mechanics, engineers, and orphans of industrial accidents. The first recipients were announced under a clear Houston sky, their smiles brighter than any inheritance could ever buy. I never touched a dollar of the money personally. It belonged to the people my father's empire had crushed. The night it all ended, I drove out to the cemetery. The marble stone gleamed beneath the moonlight. Victor Reed, 1955–2023. I knelt, pulled the silver USB from my pocket, the one that had started it all. A&D placed it gently against the granite. You were right, Dad, I whispered. Sometimes nothing is the only way to earn everything. The wind shifted, brushing the grass like a sigh. For the first time, I didn't feel invisible. I felt free. As I turned to leave, my phone buzzed with another headline, another viral clip. But this time it wasn't humiliation. It was redemption. Disinherited son restores father's legacy through 120 Martyrs Foundation. I smiled faintly, pocketing the phone. If you believe truth always finds its way out, subscribe for more stories that prove it.